So these are the most common vitamin deficiencies that I've seen with ADHD. After running thousands of different lab tests on my ADHD patients, this is what I've come down to the conclusion as far as when it comes down to which are the most common. And so you're going to want to pay attention because I was very surprised when I collected all this data to see what was truly the most common deficiency and what needs to be more thought through as far as how it does impact your ADHD, which I'm going to go and dive into that as well. So you're going to want to stick around for that. So first off, the very first one that I think I've always known, but after like collecting all the data and looking at all the lab tests that we've done throughout all of these years that we've done these lab tests, is that definitely B vitamins are probably one of the more common ones that we see deficient with people with ADHD. Now, to keep in mind, we have very select people that we do work with. We work with people with adults. So this doesn't include kids. It includes just adults with ADHD, which is very unique. And the reason why it's unique is because if you look at all the research that's out there, I always find that they're usually only testing kids with ADHD. And so I have found, this is what surprised me, is there is a difference between the kids with ADHD and adults with ADHD because there's not really any research out there when it comes to adults with ADHD and seeing what is truly deficient. And so I only have my data to go off of, and that's what I found really surprising. And so when it came to B vitamins, it was actually 60, oh, sorry, it was 60%. So 60% of people that we tested were deficient in B vitamins. That's a lot. And I'll explain here more towards the end of the video of why this is so important when it comes to your ADHD. Now, the most common one was vitamin B6. In fact, about 50% of people that we tested were low in vitamin B6. Then vitamin B12 was probably the next most common one, which is about 30%. And then vitamin B3, which was about 20%, often as we would see it being deficient. Now, I'll explain why this is so important, especially when it comes to the ADHD brain, why it's impacting and why you need to make these adjustments if you're truly deficient in it. The next one I want to talk about is vitamin A. Now, vitamin A is an important antioxidant, and so it definitely can impact ADHD for sure, it can impact your health. But I was surprised to see how often I saw this one deficient. And this one, I'm just pulling up my numbers here. This one was actually about 32% deficiency, which is pretty common, especially with people, adults with ADHD. And the next one that we do see that's very common is vitamin D levels. Now, I'll also explain how this has to do with dopamine, how it impacts dopamine. But I kind of want to go over these numbers first, and then I'll dive into that. But vitamin D was actually 29% deficiency. Now, I'm talking about significantly deficient. Usually, I like to see people in about 50 range here, even though they consider that average, but I still consider it kind of deficient. But people that were critically deficient were about 29%. Now, another big one is vitamin K1 and K2. Now, this has a lot to do with cardiovascular health. If these are low, it can definitely impact your cardiovascular health. But people with ADHD tend to be more prone with cardiovascular issues. And this one was surprising because on average, we saw about 40% deficiency, whether it was vitamin K or vitamin K2. And that's a big one because we do need to make sure that those levels are adequate for our cardiovascular health. Now, another big one that I thought was pretty surprising to me was vitamin E, which is another important antioxidant. That one was at 20% deficiency. On average, across the board, we saw that as a 20% deficiency. Now, zinc, this one is something that you should really pay attention to because I've seen studies out there that have, and again, these are only studies, research studies that have shown with kids with ADHD, usually we'll say that about 20% or so people with ADHD are deficient in zinc, but they were only on kids. This is data I've collected with adults. And so on average that we saw, let me pull it up here, it was 29%. So higher than what I've seen in research articles. It's more common with adults to see this deficiency. Now, there is some other, and now I'm going into, obviously I already covered the vitamins. There's other additional things. These are minerals, but I want to talk about other micronutrients too. But there's other things like magnesium that I'm going to talk about here in a second that really surprised me that is different from what is shown in the research. So iron is another really big one. Now, we do see this comment with kids. I've seen it in the past when I used to work with kids that is deficient. There's also research that shows that it's deficient. But with adults, what I found is that it's 18%. So still pretty high. And iron has a lot to do with carrying, oxygen and nutrients to the brain. And so if that's deficient, we'll see symptoms of focus issues. We'll see brain fog issues. It sometimes can present like it has all the different ADHD symptoms, but that might be the primary issue is a deficiency in iron. This is why it's really important to look at these things and test for them. Now, I get there's a lot to look at. In fact, if you want to, I have my ADHD lab protocol guide. It goes over even more depth than just the micronutrients, but all the different labs that you should run that are critical for people with ADHD. You can download that in the description below. I have that in the description. Okay, next one this one is one that surprised me, is omega-3s. A lot of people talk about omega-3s. Even me, I did a research article back when I was in medical school on this. But the problem was it was research for kids. This is what surprised me, is that I only saw that this was a 12% deficiency in adults. Whereas I've seen in research has been 30 to, I've seen even other research article talk about like up to 50% deficiency, but it's with kids. With adults, it's different. Now, I'm not sure why exactly that is. Maybe just because adults are a little bit better with maybe getting their fats in, or they get too much fats in. I don't know, and kids don't. So that's the thing that really kind of surprised me there. But some things that also even surprised me more is some other metabolized and amino acids that, especially serine and choline, are specific to memory issues. And I've seen this as more of a problem with adults with ADHD than versus with kids. And with this, it's actually about, on average, we saw about 26% deficiency either in choline or serine levels. And those are very specific to memory issues. So this also could be for prevention, like for dementia and Alzheimer's disease. If you catch this on early, it's good to catch that so that way you can supplement it or specifically get nutrients and foods that target improving choline and serine levels. Okay. Another big one is CoQ10. Now, CoQ10 has a lot to do for helping with making ATP. It's in the mitochondria, and so therefore it helps producing energy for our cells. So if you're dealing with burnout in your ADHD symptoms, it's possible that your CoQ10 levels could be low. And so with this one, we were at, it was 26% deficiency across the board. Okay. So now, what about magnesium? Because everyone talks about magnesium. This is the one that really surprised me than anything else. And with adults, like what I've tested, now again, this is just from my testing of doing thousands of different tests, working with lots of different patients with ADHD, it was only 9% deficiency. And that's what surprised me. I think it's more common with kids with ADHD because I've seen the research too that it shows that kids with ADHD tend to be a lot more deficient in magnesium, up to like 30+%. So, but with adults, it was only 9%. So, but this is why it's very important to test to see what you specifically need. Because if we look at the things that these different micronutrients impact, it impacts dopamine and serotonin and other different neurotransmitters. I'm just going to talk about these two, but I want you to look at this very closely and see this right here. These are called cofactors. So you see P5P, which is the activated form of vitamin B6. Remember, I told you about 60% of people that we tested were low in vitamin B levels. And vitamin B6 was the most common one. You see iron there. You see vitamin D there. You also you see vitamin C, vitamin B3. See, like these are all really important. Like especially vitamin B6 is a big one, and vitamin D and iron. This is why it's so important to test for this, because it definitely can impact how you build and modulate different neurotransmitter levels, especially dopamine and serotonin. So if you would like for me to actually order these labs for you and find the root cause of your ADHD symptoms, then I'd love to do that. You could click on the link in the description below to book your first appointment with me. That way I can dive into your medical history and understand what labs we need to do. And I can definitely order those for you. So definitely click on that link. Again, it's a 45-minute appointment one-on-one strategy session. You click that link in the description below. But I'd love to help you out if you want that further help. So thank you guys so much for attending. I'll see you guys all on the next live stream. Thanks. Bye.